money that we're spending in education in this country over the last 3 decades, and the results have not gotten better. I think that if we had doubled the investment in education and we saw double, the results, then I think it would be very hard to argue against. You have cities across the country, like I was just up in Newark, New Jersey today. They're spending $17,000 per child, and their results are at the absolute bottom. So I think we've created a situation where it's very hard to say to the American taxpayers, the way that we're going to solve this problem is by putting more money in, because the data so far doesn't show that when you put more money in the system, you necessarily get a better result.
Yeah, I mean, that just gets back to your point from earlier on creating effective systems of measurement and so on and so forth. We do have a responsibility, of course, to make sure that the public dollar is being spent in the most effective way possible. And the fact that we have state budget crises makes that all the more important.
Ryan.
This question asks, schools are dropping technical programs across the country. Do you worry that without this alternative track, high school dropout rates will increase? Do you think it is important to keep the technical track in schools in order to encourage non-college bound students?
I'm always a little wary about people who say, we need career and technical education. That's a politically correct way of saying vocational education now, for those kids who are not college bound or college material or that sort of thing. Because in the past in this country, we've actually used those kinds of tracks to determine what a kid's going to do, for the rest of their life very, very early on, which I don't think that we want to do. The goal of an education system has to be to graduate kids who have choices in life, so that when they graduate from high school, they have the opportunity to go to a 4-year university if that's what they choose to do, and they can do so without remediation. They have the skills and knowledge necessary to do that. Or if they choose to go straight into the workforce, they have the skills and knowledge that they need to be able to get a good paying job that's going to be able to support a family, right? And those are not mutually exclusive things. But I think to make a determination when the kid is in 8th grade about whether or not they're college material and what track they're going to be on, I think can be extraordinarily dangerous. I think that what you are seeing nowadays and what DCPS is doing right now with Phelps, which is having a track where children can actually gain some real-life skills, but also they are involved in a rigorous college-going curriculum at the same time, and then they really do have the choice at the end of high school is the right way to go.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. And just to add on, with President Obama's goal of the U.S. returning to being the highest proportion of college graduates in the country, I think that's something that really needs to be examined in the sense that we're looking at really, if we're going to be able to fulfill that, a real reliance on private for-profit colleges. And we really need to consider is that really an option that we want to take. Because we've seen a higher rate of default with those colleges. We've seen kind of an abuse of which populations they're enrolling in, of course, the gainful employment law, that they're not able to actually make money that's really commensurate with the tuition that they were paying for it. So in a sense, career and technical education offers kind of another way to that might be an alternative to this, instead of having to go to a for-profit private college to get the education that you really need to be employed.
I don't have too much to add, but I will say that technical programs represent a potential pipeline not only they represent a potential pipeline into 2-year community colleges, and we can think intelligently about how to structure those programs in such a way that students are prepared for the community college experience and on that track. And many of the programs around the country are not successful at doing that right now, and that's also something that we need to look at when we're having the education reform conversation.
Ryan, do you have another one?
What strategies do you think we should use to get around the strict guidelines of the public school system?
I'm not sure I totally understand the question.
Yeah, I don't understand it either.
All right.
I think she might be referencing autonomous schools, that initiative.
So, I mean, let me just say that having run a large public school system, I can tell you that a lot of the things that the district does makes absolutely no sense whatsoever. And so it is an incredibly frustrating environment for a high-performing, motivated, for example, principal or teacher to work in oftentimes. And part of what I tried to do when I came into the system was to give some autonomy and some freedom and some flexibility to those schools that were doing well. We're knocking it out of the park every day. Essentially, what the central office was doing was making their lives harder. And I thought the best thing that I can do is just get out of their way. They know what they're doing. They know what's best for their student population. Let's stop sort of putting all of these bureaucratic things in place where they have to come to this meeting on truancy when they have 98% daily attendance. So I think that it's important for the central office of a school district to understand that their job is not to lord over the schools and tell them what to do and ensure they're in compliance with everything. Their job is to be in service of schools and of families and of children. And that's so counter to what the current culture is. You know, I used to walk through the central office all the time and I'd see people, you know, who'd pick up the phone and it was a parent who had a question and they literally looked like they could not be more annoyed to be answering that question. I said, that's your job. We are here to serve these people. If you can't be bothered with these folks, then you should find another job. You should, we have to reorient ourselves and what the purpose of a school district is to be focused more on being in service to schools and families.
Just to add very briefly to that, we've seen in a lot of sort of school control fights over the last 15 or 20 years, really adversarial relationship, and I think that it gets back to kind of a collective action problem, having to do with people who are most invested in the system as it stands, being the ones who are most politically active on the issue, and people with sort of an abstract interest in it, like, oh gosh, I wish DC had a better school system, but I don't have a kid in it, or Denver or Boston or whatever, not really doing, not putting all their eggs in that basket, so to speak. So I think solving that problem isn't just we need better administrators, they should use X, Y, and Z strategies problem, but a problem of constituencies and creating effective constituencies for public school reform. So, I mean, it's obviously something we can all help with and something that we're trying to make more effective.
And another question is, how well are people doing within the capacity that they have in their situation? So, for example, 2014 comes around, and No Child Left Behind is going to say that every school needs to have 100% of its students performing at proficiency, and you're going to have some of the best schools not make AYP. And that's just going to be really unfortunate if we don't see a repeal of No Child Left Behind, or a reauthorization, rather, of No Child Left Behind. But how do you measure so that you don't tell people to jump 10 feet high? You tell them to jump to a level that's achievable, that's motivational, but isn't demoralizing. And at the same time, challenges the people who are doing really well in their situations and pushes them to do even better.
I just want to make one comment, because I've heard a lot of people sort of talk about No Child Left Behind and the need to modify it, and I actually believe that some modifications need to be made as well. But a lot of what you hear is this fact of, well, these schools are rated as failing schools, and that's very demoralizing, and so we can't demoralize people and make them, sort of feel like failures because they're in these schools that are labeled as failing. But if they are failing, you got to call a spade, right? I mean, the problem, when I came into the Washington, D.C. public schools in 2007, 8% of the 8th graders in the city schools were operating on grade level in mathematics. 8%. Which means that 92% of our children did not have the skills and knowledge necessary to be productive members of society. Now, when I looked at the performance evaluations of the adults in the system at the same time, you would have seen that 95% of people were being rated as doing a great job. How can you have a system where all the adults are running around thinking, I'm doing good stuff for kids, and what we're producing is 8% success? All the adults were happy. They thought they were doing good work, et cetera, et cetera. We were failing our kids. So we have to create a balance. While you don't want to discourage people, you also don't want to give people a sense that what they're doing is absolutely fine when it's not, when we are actually failing our children, because that doesn't set up the right dynamic either. So you've got to create a balance between, not totally discouraging people, but also being very honest about where we are and what we expect from them moving forward.
Okay, this one is just for Michelle. You just said that you think that there are specific modifications that need to be made to No Child Left Behind. And the question is, what are these specific modifications that you think should be made?
I think one of them is that right now, the way that No Child Left Behind is written, there's a huge emphasis on highly qualified teachers, but the qualifications are sort of front-end qualifications. Did you pass this test? Do you have this degree, et cetera, et cetera. I think it actually has to shift to be a highly effective teacher, right? If you are in the classroom and you're showing results, then you're highly effective and you can stay, because I think the front-end stuff is much less important and informative than the back end. So that's one modification. Two, I think we have to be clear, particularly with special needs children, special education children, and ELL children, of what is both an aggressive goal for them and also a reasonable goal for them. So if a 16-year-old is coming into the States in September, we can expect there to be growth in their English language acquisition. Can we expect them at the end of 9 months to be completely proficient and on 10th grade level in English? No. So understanding the challenges that we have with those groups of kids and having high expectations, but also having reasonable expectations, I think, are important. And then the last is that right now the way that AYP is calculated is that you have to see you have to meet a certain mark in order to meet AYP. And so unfortunately you're in a situation where a school, and I had many schools like this, who were 0.05 point away from meeting their objective, and then you had schools that went backwards 15 points. And they were both categorized as not meeting AYP, when in fact one had seen significant gains, just not enough, and the other one had gone backwards. And so I think there has to be a more granular differentiation of sort of success and whether or not people are seeing growth or not.
Grayson or Zach, you guys have any comments on Shelby?
Good question, or just one of Michelle's?
But moving to the final question. So what do you see as the relative responsibility of students, parents, teachers, school administrators, and the community in a student's outcome? How are these stakeholders best held accountable for achieving at their best capacity?
I think everybody bears responsibility. I think that we as educators, people in the central office, principals, teachers, we bear a huge part of the responsibility. Parents also have to be responsible for what's going on, and the kids every day. I think though that even though everyone has to bear some of the responsibility, I think when you are running a school district or you're sort of responsible for that particular universe, you have to really ensure that the mindset and the mentality is around what you can control. And what you can control is the employees that you have. You can't necessarily control what parents are doing and not doing. And it's very frustrating to me when I hear people say, well, if you look at poor and minority kids and their achievement in places like Washington, D.C., it's the parents' fault. If the parents were only more involved, then the kids would be doing better. But you saw in this movie that there are parents across the country who want something better for their kids. They're desperate. They're, Mr. Saxon, please send me the folder and answer my phone call. And we're not actually doing our side of the job. Once we as the school district are doing everything that we're supposed to be doing, then I think we'll have every right to go to the parents and the kids and say, now we're going to hold you accountable too. But if we're falling short, if we're not doing our job in terms of welcoming parents and respecting them and expecting the best, then it's very hard if the central office is not doing their job and the teachers and principals are not doing their job to then put expectations on these families or the kids.